Today is part two of leaky brain, and we're going to talk a little bit more deep diving into the signs and symptoms of what leaky brain is, what the consequences of leaky brain is, excuse me, what they are. And we touched a little bit on it last week, but we're going to go a little bit more deep diving into it this week. So, as I mentioned last week, some of the signs and symptoms are brain fog, excuse me, or difficulty concentrating. Okay, so that can be that affects your cognitive ability, if you know what I'm talking about. So even your things that have to do with even memory, the ability to remember, the ability to recall things. So then we're getting into things like Alzheimer's, dementia, things like that. It's not just a simple, I mean, it all has to, the basis here is inflammation. And so the longer that stays in place, that inflammation, and the longer it's allowed to affect the body and to increase and to keep growing, then these symptoms keep getting worse and worse. So it's not necessarily going to be this full-blown on-board situation of, Alzheimer's or dementia all at once. It's going to be gradually building up to it, okay? Things like ADD, ADHD, those are considered signs and symptoms of leaky brain. Headaches, migraines, if you can't, like if it suddenly becomes worse when standing and then grows more severe as the day progresses. Mood disorders, particularly anxiety, depression, schizophrenia. These are all signs and symptoms of leaky brain. What about neuropathy, muscular sclerosis, and even seizures? These are all signs. So let's just break this down a little bit. As far as your cognitive ability, you might have reduced mental ability, inability to, difficult concentrating or multitasking, short and long-term memory loss. You might have, if you have Huntington's disease, I thought this was interesting. Changes, I'm just going to read directly from this, changes in the transport of molecules between the brain and the bloodstream, which allow Huntington's disease to progress and decrease the number of proteins available to form tight junctions within the BBB, or the blood-brain barrier. Now, some of the things here I'm mentioning can not only be a cause, but could also be a consequence of. I mentioned schizophrenia. I mentioned mood disorders like depression. Multiple sclerosis is something that can contribute to leaky brain. The autism can contribute to it, but it can also be a cause of it. It can be a consequence of it. Seizures interrupt blood-brain barrier function. Prolonged seizures permit inflammation and albumin to rise in the brain, increasing permeability in the BBB, which then can cause chronic epilepsy. So, some other things that make this whole situation worse because of the increased inflammation that they cause. Now, I mentioned before that gut dysbiosis is a cause of leaky brain, and that's basically infections. So bacterial infections, because we all know it's already connected to leaky gut, and so that just means that bacteria that's supposed to stay in the gut is leaking through, it's leaking through and getting out into the bloodstream and now going up to the brain where it doesn't need to be. It should not be. And so there's inflammation that's being caused up there because of this bacteria. Mold triggers inflammation, causes oxidative damage to the brain. Glutamate, like an excessive amount of glutamate. Now, what is glutamate? Glutamate is a nerve transmitter that the nerve cells use to send messages to other cells, signals and messages to other cells. So if you have too much glutamate, it overstimulates the nerves, causing more permeability in the BBB. Free radicals. Well, we all know free radicals aren't great for anything. So those are our source of inflammation. High blood sugar, diabetes, because they represent drastic changes in the blood sugar, they can produce oxidative stress and inflammation. So all these situations here I'm mentioning are what can cause leaky gut or leaky brain to be even worse. Okay. Elevated homocysteine. This is an amino acid, mostly gotten from meats. So if you're a huge, huge meat eater and you have too much of this, it can extenuate, excuse me, the situation in people with heart disease, autoimmune disease, cancer, neurodegenerative diseases, and people who have survived a stroke. It changes, that tight function in the BBB and prevents it from functioning properly. It's usually associated with, and this is kind of interesting, it's usually associated with low vitamin B6, B12, and folate or B9. High fat, high caloric diets and obesity also increase oxidative damage and deprive the brain of oxygen. Liver damage can contribute to worsening the situation. Low quality sleep can contribute to worsening the situation. So there's a lot of varied symptoms and consequences of leaky brain. But you might be wondering, what, if anything, can we do to improve leaky brain? Well, that's what we're going to talk about next week in part 3. Because like anything, It can always be improved, in my opinion, because our bodies are wonderfully made. And if we allow it, stop doing the things that are causing the damage, our bodies can heal itself. They're allowed to heal it. We help it to do that. So can it be healed? Yes, it can be. Can it be improved? Yes, it can be. So next week, Wednesday, we'll talk about part 3, what can be done to help heal leaky gut. Have a great rest of the day.